Hello, everyone. Hi. Our speaker here, Nguyen Nguyen's here. He's a lead programmer at Ivy Road Studios. He's a previous UT graduate, and he's here to do a developer Q&A. So if you guys have any questions about being a developer in the industry, please direct them to Andrew. But please give it up for Andrew and his talk. Thank you guys so much.
Hello. 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 Does this work?
Oh, but it's not
Hello.
working.
Hello.
Is the light green?
Oh, there it is. Oh, I think I lost signal.
It's freaking out.
I mean, I can try to project.
These mics are always funky. Here, we'll try a different one.
Hello.
Perfect.
Hello. Hi, so I'm Andrew Nguyen. I'll give a little background on myself first. I am currently a lead programmer at a studio called Ivy Road. It's like a newer studio. It's unannounced game. The studios have been announced, but before that, I worked at Airship Syndicate. I was there since the beginning of back when it was a Kickstarter and everything. So I worked on Battle Chasers, Darksiders, Rune King, and then before that, I worked on Star Citizen at Cloud Imperium. And then before that, I was at BioWare Austin on Old Republic, the Star Wars MMO. And then before that, I worked at Twisted Pixel Games, doing QA stuff for Gunstringer and Explosion Man, I think. Yeah. So it's general background. But yeah, just here to answer any questions you guys have about the industry, about being a developer in different size studios, the roles, etc. Whatever y'all want to know. Any questions so far?
I'll kick us off. You mentioned that one of your roles is QA. Is that how you broke into the industry?
It's not necessarily how I'd say it broke in. It was definitely there's a lot less resources to get into the game industry back then, and it was definitely an avenue of just. I actually worked two jobs. I worked as a web developer, and then I also worked as QA, and it was just kind of a way to expose myself to a game studio and just kind of gain knowledge in the general workings of game studio and just trying to get to know people. Because there was just there was so little back then. I didn't know anyone in the industry or anything like that. But it was definitely helpful because I'd say that when I worked at BioWare Austin, I worked as a test automation on the platform team. And platform is all the backend stuff, like user accounts, logins, website, all that stuff. And so having come from a web developer background and then game QA, that's how I got into that role. Yeah. Which slowly led me to meeting a lot of people there because pre-release, before Old Republic came out, that studio was 600 people in person in one building. So I met a lot of people through that. And then I met some early mentors, and then that kind of slowly cascaded into the next thing. Yeah. Question? Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up question on that. You mentioned that you went from QA and then you met people and then eventually got the programming. Could you expand more on that path from QA to programming roles?
Well, so I studied physics at UT and I did a minor in CS. So I had a little bit of programming background, right? And then I did web development for a little bit, and then to do test automation was sort of a scripting programming role. But through there, I became good friends with one of the tools programmers, and then some of the platform developers, and they kind of as I worked on my own programming skills on the side, just personally, I would definitely go to them, and they would guide me on what's a good best practice, and then just point me to resources and everything like that. And so that's where I think I got a lot of help, was just having people who were in different roles that I would want to do, and then just pointing me to what I need to know, right? Because the big issue is just not knowing what you don't know, and so they can at least point me to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From when you started working in games, how has the industry changed since then? And has the industry changed a lot since then? And if it has, how's
it's changed a lot. So, I mean, my first role was in 2011, so it's like 13 years ago now. And it's, I mean, well, actually, some things have changed, some things have not. Like it was pretty unstable back then, and the last year and a half have been horrible. So I can't really say that much has changed. I thought it did, but maybe not. But and then everything was strictly in office back then, so there was hybrid wasn't even a thing, and then full remote was just like unheard of. So that's completely changed a lot, and because of that, like workflows have changed, the way you interact with everyone has changed. Um, so a lot of that dynamic has changed a lot, and then I think a lot of things have changed for the better in terms of just like a lot of like workplaces having a better respect towards like a work-life balance. Um, just the general diversity of the workplace has improved at most studios I've seen and most friends I've talked to. Yeah, a lot of that because I feel like it, a decade or so ago, and then more so before that, like it was already improving a lot by the time I got into the games industry. But there's definitely a lot of studios out there that had kind of this whole boys club mentality that was like not great. Um, and so luckily a lot of that has improved a lot throughout the industry. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I have kind of two questions. So, in the past, did you see yourself kind of more, going into something that was not the games industry before you kind of decided? And also, I guess now that you're in the games industry, what do you think you get out of this that you probably wouldn't get like anywhere else?
I mean, I think it was a long time desire for me to go into the games industry, but just like not figuring, not really knowing a clear path to it. The other thing I was really interested was in like uh, in physics in general, right? And so I was considering going to graduate school for physics. But then I think what really changed my mind was like I think like in 2010 or 2009 or something like that, I just showed up to a global game jam and just did a game jam, and I'm like, oh, it's like this is completely viable if I just go more in this direction. And I met some people during that kind of that I kept in touch with for the following years. Um, Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
And then the second part is like, yeah, what do you think you get out of working in the games industry that you wouldn't?
Oh yeah, I mean there's definitely a lot of like difficult aspects of the game industry that I don't love still, but then the unique thing is like it's definitely the people, like as a programmer being like it's one of the more technical roles, but to be a technical role in a highly creative environment is really unique versus other like software jobs. And then I think in a lot of, I mean, I haven't worked too many jobs outside of games, but just like through my friends from undergrad, fast forward over a decade, right? And a lot of them, they work environments where work is one space, and then the rest of their lives are another. But I feel like there's a large intersection in games, because like if you're driven enough to work in games, then you're driven by similar interests, and then people who are interested enough in games to make games also have similar interest in other areas as well. So like I have a lot of friends that I've made throughout the game industry, and I found talking to my other non-games industry friends that's like not common, that people like become lifelong friends with their coworkers and things like that. And so that's kind of a unique environment because you get to work with people who like all the same things you do, and then it's a super collaborative environment where you get to work outside of your strict domain, right? And it's just Yeah, it's just a very fun, creative environment. Yeah.
I actually have a question. So you mentioned that you worked at a couple companies now where you're in there from the ground floor starting.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to folks who might be interested in taking that path and starting their own game development studio?
I mean, I would, for that kind of stuff, I would say, because I've worked at 3 startups now. Because like I was at Cloud Imperium at the beginning, towards the beginning, not the very beginning, but the very beginning for Airship and the very beginning for Ivy Road. And like with Airship and Ivy Road, I'm like very involved in the hiring processes and stuff like that. And because our budget is so limited and we have so few resources, like we weren't at my current studio, actually at both, it's very difficult to find openings for junior roles because we need people that can like hit the floor running and wear a lot of hats all at once. So it's just like more reliable to hire like mid-level or higher. Not that juniors can't do it, it's just like hard to find. And so I think just like working 1 gig at a more established studio that has more room and more resources to mentor people, I think is better. And then also at a mid or larger studio, you learn a lot about processes and tools. And I think just like being exposed to that and having people around you that are very familiar with those processes and tools to just kind of absorb that knowledge. So that way, if you do want to start your own studio, you kind of like, what is the thing is you don't necessarily just learn good processes, you also learn all the flaws with them.
Yeah.
And I think just like experiencing those pitfalls like firsthand help a lot for like your decision making process for how you run your own. So I think just joining something more established first for at least a year or 2 before trying to go off on your own, because you're gonna like definitely reinvent the wheel a bit if you don't have experience and you're gonna start a studio. You're gonna make a lot of common mistakes that other people would have would have been obvious to avoid. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about hard skills.
Yeah.
In your last couple of studios, what are some of the publicly available tools and programming languages that your teams have used? And then I guess, like thing for the audience after you answer is like, does that match up with what you guys are learning?
The tools out there.
Yeah.
Or,
what have you used at like current space? What are these Cloud Imperium that you can talk about? I know they've always got like internal stuff. But.
Yeah. Well, Cloud Imperium was CryEngine, and then Bioware used something called Hero Engine. I mean, CryEngine is C++ as a programmer, and then a nice thing now is like a lot of engines are publicly available. When I was like started undergrad, I think like Unreal was like a $100,000 license minimum, and then plus your revenues. So it just like wasn't available. You couldn't see it. So I think just like Unreal and Unity really are really great publicly available engines to work from and build stuff in, because at Ivy Road we use UE4 and I use C++, and some blueprints. At like Rune King was made in Unity, Darksiders was made in UE4, Battle Chasers was made in Unity, and then Cloud Imperium, Star Citizen is made in CryEngine, and then it started in CryEngine, and then it became Lumberyard, and then it's like a very, very custom engine now. But its starting point, its underlying code is still very CryEngine based. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure y'all are building stuff in Unity and UE4 now. So that's like very transferable skills already. Okay. And especially Unreal right now, a lot of studios are using Unreal. Like Valorant's made in Unreal, like things like that. Sure.
When you're talking about indie studios and like running your own studio, you mentioned that while you're at a major studio to learn, it's important to not focus on just the stuff that works and stuff that doesn't. That was a very interesting point to me. And I was wondering if you could expand on that, maybe share some experiences you had with stuff that like you cannot believe was being done at a AAA studio that you would never do on your own.
I mean, at the really big studios, so a big problem with like software development or just any sort of development, right, is with you and your team members, there's a consensus building step, right, to make sure everyone is in agreement, everyone's on the same page on what you're trying to do as a team, and then you move forward. And if it's just you and me working on something, then we talk to each other, and then it's like, oh, cool, let's go forward with that. There's three of us, then there's three-way communication, and so on and so forth, right? So you see an exponential problem there. And so in order to prevent the exponential consensus building step, you compartmentalize it off, and then your team of programmers, your team of gameplay programmers may talk amongst each other with the lead, and then the leads will talk to each other, and then the directors will talk to their leads, and then the directors will talk to each other, and so on and so forth, right? So there's like exponential communication within each layer, and then there's syncing layers with meetings. But because of that, the bigger the organization, the more meetings there are. And so like, I mean, that like is kind of a painful thing that you learn about bigger studios, and just like understanding that, I guess it isn't so much a flaw as a necessity, but it's just like more of a preference that I found that I didn't like. That like in order to have a larger impact on the project, the less programming you get to do. Because in a bigger studio, to have more impact, you need to be in a position to make decisions. But in order to be in a position to make decisions, you spend all your time in meetings, because it's just all you're doing is consensus building above and consensus building below, and propagating information back and forth. And then you get very little time to program. And so the smaller the studio, the less meetings there are, and the more you get to create yourself. And so like that's something I learned through working on both ends of that, right? There's definitely processes that feel very inefficient, and I understand that they exist out of necessity because of the size. But it's like you see a bug, and then you submit that there's an issue here. You can't just go in and fix it. And it has to propagate up. It has to be triaged upward the chain, and then it gets, through production will get set into what milestone, what sprint that they deem is priority to even fix that. And then you submit your fix, and then that goes through a whole QA pass, and then that has to go through different branches in order to propagate back up to live and all this stuff, right? So like you see this like tiny like 2-line of code fix, but you can't just submit it. It goes through this whole process, and it makes sense, but it also feels inefficient at the same time. And it's like, well, some of these like maybe like the team size should only be this amount if you want a certain degree of efficiency in processes, but then you have to scope your project to what that size can even do. Things like that. You kind of learn a lot of preference points. And then you also see in smaller studios being not needing all these meetings and processes because it's smaller can also, like, if you go too far, it can also curse it a bit, because you'll start seeing areas in which some bigger studio processes make sense even though you're so small of a team, because you can go off in so many different directions, and some milestones can go like way off the rails without enough controls and processes in place.
Thank you.
You mentioned you're pretty involved in the hiring process. Is there any skills you look for besides like hard skills, or like you specifically look for in like hires?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that this is kind of like how I filter through hiring, and it's not how everyone does it, but I think there's a general consensus on, like, because things at events like GDC and stuff, me and my friends will all talk about this kind of stuff, and it's kind of similar at a lot of studios. but the main thing is that we have to filter through so many resumes, right? And a lot of people apply for games, and a lot of unqualified people apply as well, right? So you get like hundreds and hundreds of applications, if not thousands sometimes, and a large percentage of those don't qualify at all. So you have to filter through quickly. So we're not looking through portfolios yet at this stage. We have to just filter based on the resume for now until we can filter it down. So the big thing there is, it being concise. Like a one-page resume is very, very preferable. The less I have to read and get the point across, the better. The job listing will have, like, especially at small studios, like I will know exactly what we need. I know exactly where our pain points. Sometimes it's just like, I'm doing all this stuff. Like, for example, on the beginning of Rune King, I was the only programmer. And I'm like, I really hate UI stuff. We have all this UI stuff we need to do. And it's like slowing me down. I just like want to focus on this. It's like, let's just hire a UI programmer. So then I'm like, here's all the things that I'm bad at and I don't want to handle. And I wrote those into called the requirements. And so when I'm skimming through these resumes, I'm looking for who matches these requirements, like pretty much who best can fulfill what we need. And so you want to tailor your resume to have one-for-one address the requirements, right? Like, here's what they're looking for. They put in the listing. Like, do the bullet points on your resume correlate to the listing? And the more that does, the more likely I'm just going to put it into the, like, let's review and look at this further pile. So it's not just like hard skills. It's more of demonstrating that you can do what we're looking for. And so, the thing that I look for most is the projects you've worked on, right? So I think most games industry resumes will just be like your name, and then projects and what you did on the projects. And like, that's like all that matters. And the bullet points you want to leave there are the ones that correlate to requirements. And yeah. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I guess you were talking a bit about hiring on. About at what point you decide to bring in a new person, especially with being just like starting out as a studio, like being tight on the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that moment happen?
Yeah. So a lot of times where that happens is like, depending if we have budget for hiring roles, then we need to see like in our different like gaps that we're missing, like what do we need the most of, right? Like if we're seriously needing a lot of more animations and like we can get by with like not having an extra programmer or whatever, we'll have to prioritize based on that. That's just the discussion with like the leads or whoever has the decision-making power there, right? And then after that, it's like, if you do have the budget for it, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
Hiring for new roles.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hiring for new roles. Sorry, can you just repeat the question for me real quick?
Yeah. Like at what point do you know when you should hire a new role, like a new person on?
Yeah.
Like being small studio and having a tight budget.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, my point I was getting at here is if you have the budget, you do it. If you don't, then you just make cuts to your features or desires there. And then sometimes if you have a limited budget and you can't fill everything, like here's our wish list of everything we want to do. If you can't do it all, then you kind of have to choose like what you need more of, and you have to make cuts somewhere, or you have to ask for more budget, or you have to ask more time, which is more budget. So it's going to be a trade-off there, but like that's pretty much what it boils down to is either cutting something or extending a timeline or hiring someone earlier is the better that you can hire someone, or people crunch. And a lot of times people crunch, unfortunately. So yeah.
your experience with growth opportunities in between a larger studio and a smaller studio?
Okay, so I think there is actually a lot of growth opportunity in both. I think career growth wise, bigger studios is more structured. So there's like more clear, you get a lot more clarity on what needs to be reached to get like a promotion, for example, right? And they have like processes for that. They have like review periods, ways to do standard ways that they do reviews, and how they evaluate promotions, and then you get like title increases and stuff like that. But at a small studio, a lot of times there is none of that. Like, I mean, a lot of games I've worked on, there was just two programmers, right? So like, what do you promote really in there? It's just the two of us. We're both programmers. But I think where the difference is, where like title progression is more clear on how to reach it in a big studio, and you have a lot more resources for mentorship, because you have a lot more peers that you can learn from, and I think that's very, very valuable. At a smaller studio, though, in a larger studio, though, you are expected to fill a certain role, and you kind of have to advocate if you want to do other things, right? So if you're expected to do, shader programming, that's like all your tasks are going to be shader programming, and you'd be like, I really want to do some gameplay, and you're like, well, we'll get there. Just take care of this first, and we'll see if there's time in the schedule. Maybe you can pick up the task. In a small studio, you just get to wear all the hats you want. And so the growth opportunity there is that you get some real experience pretty much doing everything. So I think there's a lot of growth opportunity in both in different ways. If you get a lot less help on a small studio, you might be on your own a bit, and maybe whoever your peers are can help point you in the right direction, but you're pretty much like, it's over there, figure it out, but at least you know which way to run. But yeah, you're gonna figure out a lot on your own, but you get to do a wide range of things, which you might not get to do elsewhere. Yeah, so it's kind of different, but you'll grow in either way, either place. Someone over here? I saw a hand. No? Okay. Yeah.
I'm just really curious on how much creative influence you have on your game as a programmer.
Oh, at a small studio, a lot. Yeah, so like, I mean, pretty much like everyone is a designer, even if you're not in the designer role. So, everyone, especially on the programming side, it's very tightly coupled with design, right? Like your client for all your features is the designer. So you understand a lot about where the design is going and the design intention and like things like that. So at a smaller studio, you have a lot of impact on that. You can definitely, it's like every feature request is kind of a negotiation between the programmer, the designer, and the producer, right? The producer determining if there's time for it, or that there's something else that's of higher priority or things like that. But otherwise, assuming there is the time blocked out for it, it's just the designer and programmer going back and forth about like, here's the design that's presented, maybe you have some thoughts on it, and then you can go back and forth, and then you can, here's how I'm going to present you the tool to do it. And it's like, okay, maybe you can give me something to do this. And then it's like, okay, cool. Then you go off and make it, right? But like just through that process alone, you have a lot of impact on the designs. And yeah, like, and just like, because it's a smaller studio, you can just talk, directly to whoever. Like an example is that on Battle Chasers, we have like this primary mana and secondary mana system, and it's a JRPG style game. And our original mana system, I just like was playing it and just didn't really like it. It just wasn't hitting with me. And I was just like, I was going off on vacation somewhere, and I'm sitting in the airport, and I just like had a thought. And so then I'm just like texting Ryan, like he's like the the lead designer there, and we just like texted back and forth, and like through that, while I was just kind of waiting for my flight, like we changed the secondary mana system, and like so it completely redesigned a core system of the game as a programmer, just off the cuff like that. That doesn't happen in big studios though. Like I said, in big studios, there's so much consensus building because everyone needs to be on the same page, right? And there's hundreds of people, thousands potentially, and decisions are made and they trickle down and up, and then until there's a full consensus across the full chain, and there's all the meetings to sync that. Once all that's been done, it's such a process. Like you're not just gonna suggest something from the bottom and be able to do it. It might get trickled up and might have some influence downstream in a different future milestone, but most likely not. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Do you have anything you wish you knew before going into the game industry? Like, I don't know how long you've personally been in the game industry for like that many years, like before going into it. Like, it doesn't have to be like a regret or anything, but just like something like the game knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been in games for 13 years now. There's a lot I wish I knew. I mean, but I don't really know how to express it though, because it's like kind of like everything along the way was good, so or necessary, and then like some parts sucked, but like the hurdles are kind of the lesson in itself. Maybe I wouldn't have learned anything if I didn't go through it. But yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, how to answer that. Yeah.
How do you prevent yourself from just doing the bare minimum stuff?
Sorry.
How do you prevent yourself from just doing the bare minimum, doing by and stuff?
Oh, how do you get by with just doing the bare minimum?
No, I mean, how do you stop? How do you?
How do you do more than the bare minimum? How do you get around like fighting the urge to coast, I guess the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's. I mean, at the studios I've been at, that's just not possible.
It's more of a self-discipline thing, like I'm trying to make a portfolio and stuff. Do good art to make it interest.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
I'm trying to get myself to make 3D models, but I keep trying to avoid work and I just do the bare minimum.
I mean,
How do you get your brain to stop just avoiding work?
yeah. I don't know. I think that's going to be very different for everyone. Yeah, that's gonna vary like greatly. I mean, honestly, there are days where I feel like I want to just coast sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I've been fairly burnt out a few times, honestly. So there's definitely when you're going through that, you definitely just want to. It's hard to find the drive and motivation and inspiration to do more than you need at times. But
Yeah,
it
I
is.
feel like I just do it all the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you'll. I mean, when you get feedback on your portfolio, if maybe that will help motivate you, or if there's a project you're like really interested in.
I guess that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, you mentioned previously you've had some experience also like trying to hire and like look for people. When you're looking for somebody who would be coming fresh out of college, what is something that you wish that you'd like to see them know that would like help give them a bit of an edge in the application process?
Ooh, that's good.
I mean, the biggest thing is having like worked on completed games. Yeah, because like, I mean, like a personal project's kind of like, it depends on the role, honestly. But for the most part, universally, just having worked on completed projects, I think is huge because I think the strongest format of a games industry resume is literally just a list of projects you've completed or worked on and the things that you did on them. And like that's like pretty much your whole resume. It's just gonna be like skills, my projects and what I did, and then like a line at the bottom saying your education. Like that's pretty much like what the format's gonna look like.
How much weight does like game jam projects have on like an early resume if someone's just starting out?
I mean, I think like as someone who does game jams and enjoys them a lot, like I think they're impactful because like I know what goes into them and just I know like it teaches a lot about forcing you to scope because that's like an issue a lot of people have, right? But like given a time constraint and a design, like what can you pull off? And so I think that's valuable, and I think uh, they do have a weight there, but like working on a bigger project where there is more long term collaboration and communication required, I think that's also very impactful. And then I think personal work is valuable for, especially for art, because on these game jams and stuff, you don't really get to showcase like how far your skills can go because it's so time scoped. And then also sometimes you work on projects in which the style doesn't anywhere resemble the studio you're applying to. So it's like if you're trying to do environment art, you're probably gonna want something like if it's gonna be for a stylized like style game at a studio, you're gonna want stylized. I mean, for environment art, sadly, it's like stylized rocks and trees, but yeah, you're gonna want to show off something like that. So the personal work like definitely goes really, really far for art, but for programming and design and stuff is going to be heavily weighted towards just the actual projects, like the games that you've made. Yeah.
I was curious about how do you guys work with content creation, artwork, and that kind of stuff in terms of version control? Like, what sort of difficulties do you have, or do you have just individuals working on one thing and no one else can touch it?
Yeah, for content creation, like I like art and animation assets and things like that. Yeah, I mean, fortunately for me, like every game studio I've worked at, we've used Perforce, and you can set rules for exclusive locking on file types, which is currently how we're doing it now at Ivy Road too. Like, just like as like the P4 admin, you can't put in a bunch of rules. Anything with this type of asset tag is going to be exclusive lock always. And so that's pretty much how you manage it. Yeah, I don't know how other studios do it that don't use Perforce because that's all I've used for like team projects. Yeah. Yeah.
In the beginning, I'm at the beginning of my programming career,
Mhm.
and it's fine right now that it's like I'm mostly following like tutorials or doing like a very simple approach to when I'm creating a big project.
Yeah.
But how do you break out of that and get more of like an intermediate like overview of the project where things are more like organized and structured, so the systems are like separated and not interactive later as much?
I mean, I feel like there's a dangerous trap there as a programmer because if you try to overanalyze these systems, people tend to over engineer. I think a good thing to keep in mind is just to make it work and then make it good. A lot of people focus too much on building like an elegant design or structure. I think that will come later through experience. You kind of learn like best practice shortcuts or things that are just naturally more performant that you just do. But I think until you know those things or have measured it personally and seen it, like I wouldn't dwell too much on what's theoretically better design or anything like that. And I think you're gonna see that, especially if you're in early stage game development at a studio, in like R&D phases and things like that, a lot of features are gonna get thrown away. So it's just like not worth spending weeks or a month trying to build this like beautiful, elegant system that's super robust and all this stuff sometimes. But sometimes it's just like spend 3 days and just slap it together and make it work. And as you gain experience, it'll tend to be more robust naturally. But I think just getting it to work and demonstrating it, and then iterating on that, and then throwing it away if you have to, just rebuilding it if it decides to they expand it more, is way more valuable. Just to see it earlier is better because in those early stages, so much gets thrown away. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I don't know how to explicitly go from the beginner stuff. I think I think you just got to work on projects. And a lot of it just comes through like understanding how to collaborate with a designer. If you're doing gameplay, if you're doing engine, it's different. I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
What advice do you have for continuing to learn and grow as an engineer while you're working? Just what are some things you should focus on while you're in your role to make sure you're getting better and
I don't know if I have general advice for that other than just like it's gonna be different at every studio you're at, right? Because sometimes the technical tasks are just like beyond your knowledge set, and that in itself is kind of motivating because you're forced to learn how to do it, and so you're gonna dig into the documentation for whatever engine you're using, if it exists, talking to people more senior than you who have worked in those systems for information, maybe like watching a talk or reading a book to just like understand it better, to work on that system. So just like through that, you're gonna learn a lot. I think for me, I feel like an important thing that I value is just understanding the domain space. There's like just always trying to maintain an understanding of what you don't know. And there's just like so much that you don't know, and it just keeps expanding and growing and growing and growing. But at least just being aware of just like how large the domain space in different areas are and what it entails, and like understanding enough of the details that you would know what to look up. It's been very valuable. And then just like, if you're motivated enough, just like dive into like whatever interests you. If not, then at least just be aware and just like understand how some high level architecture works and things like that around these things that are in the domain space, right? So like if you're tasked to build like an NPC that does some behavior and your studio uses behavior trees, and sure, you can just dive in and documentation, understand that. But maybe you can like expand from that and be like, maybe try to understand how decision-making systems work and what alternate decision-making systems exist out there. And just like understanding more of the AI domain space if you're going to be working on that kind of stuff, so that future tasks or iterations, what to draw from and what you can look into to take the feature further. Yeah, and it kind of just spirals from there, and it just compounds over years. So yeah.
What recommendations do you have for someone trying to get into the more like engine-oriented side of game development, like not necessarily gameplay, but like engine core tools?
Yeah. I mean, for that stuff, like you won't get to do that so much on like these team projects you do in like school, especially, or game jams. You'll never touch the engine. So it's going to be a lot more like before you're working in the game industry. It's just going to be more personal work. And I think it's just demonstrating, like creating demos, pretty much. You're going to like focus on making some like tech demos. You're still going to want to work in team environments to just demonstrate that you know how to work across disciplines, how to communicate, how to scope features and stuff like that. But building out tech demos, and then learning the process for like how profiling tools work. It's not good to just like take best guess optimization. It's better to just measure it and see where the actual real problem areas are to address, and then attack the low hanging fruit. And then you're kind of gonna, and then just keep remeasuring, and you'll learn through that, like what changes had the largest impact. And then, tech demos for things that you find useful, right? Like if you want to work as a render engineer, then like try building a render, and like build a rendering, the CPU side and the GPU side with all the shaders and everything like that. Just like demonstrate a scene. Or if you're gonna do physics stuff, like you can look up any open source engine, kind of gives you an idea of like existing architecture out there, right? So there's like Jolt, there's Box 2D, there's Bullet 3D. You can read through that, see, and they're all similar. They're all architected almost the same. So you can just go to the simplest example. The smallest code base for that is like Box 2D, and you'll understand how it's set up. And then just like building something like that, either using it itself or just building your own, and just building like a simple rigid body demo, for example, or building a memory manager or event system, or just like it just shows, like I think for engine stuff, I think understanding the low level stuff is very important, and memory and data oriented stuff becomes very, very important, right? So sorry, yeah, I can go on a tangent about performant paradigms, but yeah, that's pretty much what I would do. You'd want to demonstrate some good tech demos and show code snippets of like just well-written code. Yeah.
Just add on to that. You make asset store solutions for Unity. I work at Unity.
Yeah.
You've had burnout several times. Did you do anything in particular to get over it?
I mean, I definitely tried things. I'm less burnt out than I used to be, but it definitely kind of changed my relationship with work, and trying to establish better boundaries for like work-life balance, and then being more picky about like what I was looking for in a studio, and things like that. Just making sure you have a good set of like hobbies that you don't keep up with outside of it, and just things like that. Just like a lot of little lifestyle and priority changes. A lot of burnout comes from, it's not always crunch and things like that. Like for me, crunch was a big source of it, but it generally just comes from like fulfillment from something. So how much you get out of what you put in, right? So a lot of times, for crunch examples, for example, it's like, it could be you pouring a lot of work into something, and let's say the project gets canceled. You might feel burnt out from that, right? Like there was nothing came out of all this effort you put in, or you work on this project and you're not crunching, you're working regular, 30 to 40 hours a week or whatever. But your features like that you're working on just like don't get used, or they don't go anywhere. And so like you can get burnt out from that, even though you're not working overtime or anything. It's just like, it feels like your efforts don't have any impact. And if that goes on long enough and you just feel like it's useless, you can get burnt out. So there's like so many different sources, but all of it equates to how much you get in versus how much you put in versus how much you get out of it. And if it's too much of a disparity there, I think you'll experience burnout. And I think it's important to identify that quickly and make a change, either advocating within there or going somewhere else or whatever. But it's just like, notice it as soon as you can and try to address that. Yeah.
You mentioned that once you experience burnout, you start figuring out that you needed to set some boundaries for work to help you deal with that burnout. I've personally felt that boundaries are stuff that you have to figure out kind of as you go, because sometimes stuff gets crossed, like lines get crossed that you don't really notice until later on, like staying a little late or somebody asking you something near closing timer. And then how do you know when to set those boundaries, and how do you maintain those boundaries? How do you know when to bend them from your experience?
I mean, there's little things you can do. I mean, just like as a favor to your coworkers, to just not work late when there's not, you know, if it's there's no like studio wide crunch or anything, and you're just like working late, it kind of has a knockoff effect because when people, especially the more senior you are, or especially if you're in a lead role, if people see that you're working, they feel like that it's not okay for them to leave, and then you can like induce a sense of burnout from other people because they're like they wanted to get home by a certain time, and then because they see other people still there, they feel pressured to stay too, and then there's like maybe some resentment that will build there, which might cause some burnout. So I think even if you need to work a little extra to finish something, I think it's important to always like leave at whatever the current time is and work on it home if you need to, or like on the flip side of that is just to be okay, like tell yourself it's fine, like to not be pressured by that situation. It's like all my tasks for my sprint are getting done. Like I am not letting anyone down here, and it doesn't like, and so like I can just leave at whatever 5 or 6. Another way that you can set up a boundary is, you know, Slack messages, like people will send them all the time or whatever on after hours or weekends. Like I don't reply. I only reply during core hours. And because of that, no one messages me outside of core hours. So, but on the flip side of that, if you do reply out of core hours, then it becomes known that you always reply. And so like, you know, it could be a weekend if someone's working late and they'd be like, oh, you know, whoever knows about this. And it's like, oh, just message them, they always reply. And so then it just kind of reinforces itself. Like you replying outside of hours reinforces that it's okay to message you outside of hours. You get more of that. So I think those are some ways you can set some boundaries. And also, even if there are days where I am, you know, behind on a feature or a task, and I really want to make sure it doesn't spill over to the next sprint. So like I have worked late, just like on a one-off day sometimes, right? That's just kind of like me just not wanting to not hold my end of the work, right? But then even if I do that, especially in the lead role, I don't want other people to feel like they have to do that. So I never submit things to Perforce outside of core hours either. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for how to best present projects on your resume?
Best present projects? What do you mean?
Like in terms of how you write them up, like what you did.
Oh, yeah. I think on the bullet points, it's important to mention like what it is, how you do it, and what the impact was. Like, yeah, so you just mention like what the feature was. A little bit of like how you, like I created this whatever render using this method, and it improved, you know, performance by this amount or whatever, you know, something like that. So being able to do that for every bullet point is very, very good. And then also only putting your top highlights. I think a lot of people are always tempted to show off how much they've done, and they'll try to fill their resume with as much information as they can. It's better to just try your best to exclude all that and only include your highlights. Imagine like I get HR hands me a spreadsheet with links to 100 resumes, and I'm in the middle of working on a feature this week, and they're like, hey, review this, we want to do interviews next week. And I'm like, okay, so then I slip out some time. I look through all of these. I'm gonna read through them relatively quick. Like be super pessimistic. I'm skimming them, and let's say only 3 bullet points stick in my mind as I read. You don't want any of those bullet points to like not match what we're looking for or sound weak. So only include your strongest things in there, even if there's less things to show off. I think only include your highlights, such that if I close my eyes and pick 3 random points, and those are the only 3 things I read on your entire resume, they better make you look like you fit the role, right? So just include the highlights. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for like showcasing your work in the instance of like a canceled feature or project?
Yeah, for those kind of things, like definitely, I would check with peers in the industry there, but like you definitely have to be ambiguous. It could be like general things. If it's proprietary, I don't know if you can really mention much about it. It can't give off details of the project. Yeah, you could talk about some more general systems that you built and the impact it had. Like if you built something that was a useful tool for your designers to be able to do whatever. But it can't be as detailed as some of the other things, right? Like, yeah, I mean, that's generally how it's going to go. And in those scenarios, well, we've definitely gone to peers and go around and kind of get feedback amongst each other on like, you make sure that it's not crossing anything there. But yeah, you have to be pretty vague. Yeah.
The best to, I guess, demonstrate the impact on the resume if you don't have like experience leading projects. Say you're fresh out of college, like.
How do you demonstrate that? What do you mean?
Like a lot of, as you mentioned, ideally you want to like demonstrate like how did you make a difference in like projects you were involved in. But
Yeah.
you weren't leading the projects because of you don't have
I see. Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't have to lead a project to have a large impact. I mean, like anything you create is going to be like, the project is just the sum of everyone's efforts, right? So you can just point towards the efforts that you made that had an impact on the project.
Is contributions a fair word?
Yeah, contributions is a fair word here. Yeah. Yeah, I think just show off your contributions and just highlight those items.
Due to time, I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
How do you make contributions when you're not in like, I guess like in a company that makes those?
How do you make?
Like, how do you like? I guess how do you build a portfolio when you don't have like you can't get in the industry? Yeah, but.
I mean, that's a lot of that is going to be just like if there's, I mean, student projects or game jams or personal projects or just collaborating with people that you know or find online. Yeah, just like anywhere you can. It's a bit of a hustle there, but you just find the time to create. I think just having completed games is very, very important if you don't have ship titles yet. And it just demonstrates more than anything that you know how to collaborate and how to get something done. And then it will give you some points to bring up feature wise or whatever your role is. And I think like part of the importance of projects is just being able to create something within constraints. Because if it's just a portfolio piece could show how far you can go, right? Especially with like art or whatever. But like sometimes it's an asset that you spend hundreds of hours on. It's like not possible. And so it's like given a time constraint, here's how much I could make, and here's the quality bar I reached. I think it's really important. Yeah.
So for like portfolios, would you rather like see like an individual with like, few game jams in their portfolio, or would you rather, or like would it be more impressive if they had like a one huge like project that just like developed over time?
If the huge project finished, then that's probably more impressive. Yeah, I think there's value in both. But yeah, the bigger projects I think will generally be more valuable. I think because it will more closely resemble the kind of necessary collaboration and processes that like a commercial project is going to involve.